So at this time, I'd like to welcome Dr. Awiti to come and share with us or engage with us in terms of conversation. He is a founder and director of East African Institute, and their mandate's really unique. It's not just policy and research, but it's also about public engagement. He began his career with a focus on, I think, environment, soils, conservation, and has had a significant impact in terms, as you will see, food systems, agriculture, climate change. But really his voice is at the nexus of most policy issues in East Africa. He's in demand, great demand. We're fortunate to have him here. He's sought after globally to speak on policy issues. He has a keen interest and focus on youth, and it really is an honor to have you here this morning. So without me saying more, I'll welcome Alex.
So, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and I would like to say at the very beginning how grateful we are for the partnership with the University of Fraser Valley and all the good work that your amazing students have done with us over the last 2 years. We're very grateful to Jeremy and Lisa and Patricia, and for the enduring cooperation and partnership and support of Gary and Sherry. I would like to speak briefly this morning about really the context of what I think is an interesting intersection between food and cities, but what I think is harnessing Africa's urban moment. Which I think in many ways is a profound and unprecedented new development. I think, Paul Crutzen, Nobel laureate, has basically popularized the characterization of our species as of our time as the Anthropocene. It is an epoch in which mankind has assumed more or less a force of nature in many ways. We kind of have the scale of destruction and mayhem that is similar to earthquakes, tornadoes, and volcanoes. But this virulent disruption of a kind, especially through our industrial and technological prowess, has also been uniquely associated with migration of our kind from the fields, from rural spaces into cities. In Africa, this phenomenon of urbanism has been late in its onset, but nevertheless very profound. For instance, we've been for many years the least urbanized landmass on the continent, in the world, but we're now the most rapidly urbanizing region of the world. For instance, in Kenya, the rate of urbanization is 60% higher than the rate of annual population growth. So you can imagine the sheer energy of that. And that has many, many opportunities, but it also presents interesting challenges. So while the Anthropocene characterizes our existence today, I think we're also not just Homo sapiens, we are now Homo sapiens urbanus. We're urban dwelling, and this is unprecedented in our time. I think in 2007, we crossed over the half mark in terms of global urbanization. So globally, over 50% of our kind now live in cities. And that's what I really want to talk about, because the scale and pace of urbanization in Africa is both unprecedented, and I dare say that it presents a very unique moment, which I think is Africa's urban moment. And I think in many ways it presents a unique opportunity for Africa to begin to think anew about some of the old problems that have been very difficult to deal with in terms of, say, access to nutrition, access to health and education services, but also what has been in my community in agriculture and rural development, one of the most daunting challenges of our time. And you've had people like Bill Gates, Jeff Sachs talk about, and Kofi Annan talk about a uniquely African green revolution. And this has been something that has been totally elusive because of the dizzying diversity of African landscapes that make it very difficult to achieve the same successes that we did in Asia with the Green Revolution. You know, the soils are hugely diverse and very fragile, easily erodible, and lose their fertility in tremendously rapid ways that it's difficult to keep pace with fertilization. And then Africa has per capita the lowest access to surface water. So that makes, that's a really critical binding constraint to this. But I think the uniqueness of this urban moment enables us to think very creatively and innovatively about how we might reorganize agriculture, and I'll come to that a little bit. But even as we are staring at this urban moment, there's a number of things that are happening in Africa as well. As Sherry said, one of my kind of interests lately is the whole demographic energy that is associated with Africa, and that is characterized by the fact that 80% of the population in Africa is aged below 35. And the median age is estimated at just 19. And the projections are that even in the next, even by 2050, Africa will still be just 25 years as a median age. So that energy, that youthful momentum is going to continue for a very long time. It presents unique challenges, but I think it also presents very unique moments that enable us to begin to think differently. Now, this youthful population is also different from the one that currently exists on the continent of Africa, because about 60% of them now have more than elementary education. And this, again, is unique and new. And in places such as East Africa, where I come from, the number is about 80%, having more than elementary education. They're better educated than anybody in their families for all time. So that creates interesting opportunities, but it's also full with peril, especially if you don't manage other resources that are needed to support that energetic, aspirational population with access to better jobs and opportunity, as we know in this part of the world. Africa also happens to be the hungriest continent. And as Mark said, over 350 million African kids tonight will probably go to bed hungry. And the incidence of malnutrition, characterized by stunting, is about 35%. So think about that, and think about a young population, but also think about the fact that 60% of the world's new potential arable land is in Africa. Over 600 million hectares of uncultivated land. In my country, half of arable land is uncultivated, for obvious reasons. Lack of access to equipment and all of the constraints that I talked about, which I think there's a unique opportunity to unlock with the moment and promise of urbanization. Africa will also suffer the worst from the impacts of climate change. And then we've had this many times. As I said earlier, we have the least access to surface water. It's difficult to do agriculture in Africa for obvious reasons. The impact will manifest in many ways, with new diseases and invasive species emerging in places that we don't know how to deal with them. And just the fact that the weather patterns will change in a way that dislocates the conventional, traditional understanding of how seasons work is going to upset the farming calendar. And farmers can't deal with that, especially given the fact that there's very little access to weather and climate information in ways that farmers can actually use them. So it's really the translation from, here in Vancouver, if you're told that it's going to be a rainy day, you know what to do. You pick your raincoat and you pick your umbrella. If you're a farmer, if I tell you that we'll have lower than normal season rains, I'm not sure what you're going to do. When the guy who sells you your seed and other farm inputs still has the same old stuff, and yet the season is going to be a little shorter and compressed. So how do farmers deal with that information? Where is the opportunity to translate that information and move it across the value chain of provision of services and inputs to support agriculture that is more adaptive to the climate that we're staring at? What is also interesting is Africa is also where technological innovation diffuses the fastest. If you've traveled to Africa, we have kind of leaped over the fixed telephone line. The many Africans who, older than a lot of you in the room, who've never held a phone on their hands to speak, and the phone is tethered to a box and it's got a string on it. They don't know how that works. Okay, they've never seen a public telephone booth where you go in there and you throw in some coins and you get a dialing tone and you talk to somebody on the other end. They have grown up and lived in the age of the cell phone, of a mobile phone. And today, the cell phone penetration in Africa is about 85%. And every African in the village now has access to a cell phone. Either they own one or somebody next door in the family has a phone. Okay? Some of you know about the mobile banking phenomena in Africa that has its epicenter in East Africa, and it's popularly known as M-Pesa. So that means that you can do all kinds of transactions on your phone. You can put money on the phone. So instead of all these little plastic things that we carry that have a chip, they don't have to do that. They can pay for anything from fuel bills to paying school fees to transferring money to their relatives on their cell phones. Okay? Now that's really the power that technology has in Africa. And what that has done is that, in 2005, and I'm not kidding, financial inclusion, people who had access to bank accounts, was less than 3% of the population. Today, financial inclusion is about 90%. That means that everybody is in this space where they can move money through something. And financial sector deepening is a huge program run by DFID, the British aid, has demonstrated that this has really changed how Africans do business and how money moves around and how you can actually pay for goods and services. And think about agriculture that has been constrained by access to credit and inputs and all these things. And rural neighborhoods that are completely dislocated and disconnected from urban cities. And now thanks to a surge of foreign direct investment, we have standard gauge railways being built across East Africa, across Africa. We have better roads. We have better telephone communication networks. We have better access to electricity. So think about rural neighborhoods now being rigged with technology and with capacity for connectivity through automobiles and through railways, and how that's going to change those binding constraints around access to credit, around access to markets, around access to technology. So I think this is really changing, but it's also changing the mobility of citizens, of populations between these neighborhoods. So that in the 70s, when somebody went to the city, they were kind of like forgotten, and you'd only get to hear of them if they sent a telegram, which might not even arrive. But now that the distance has been put in chains, and we can move seamlessly between these neighborhoods, and that connection and the serendipity of those encounters is really changing how rural economies work. So now the rural-urban divide, I was talking to someone recently and they said, well, I don't know whether I'm rural-urban because I can be in any of those places in and out whenever I want. And I'm talking to them every time. So that duality is beginning to get really challenged. And I think that's opening up new opportunities for how we organize commerce, trade, and access to technology. So what I think is also interesting is the story that you've all been told many times. 10 years ago, the economists talked about a hopeless continent. And then they came back and said, well, we changed our mind. Africa is rising. So that Africa rising narrative is also very important because now we have the fastest expanding middle class in all of the world. And if you throw in that, Africa will be home to the largest workforce by 2050. So again, that's going to change those dynamics. And I think the way that labor and capital is going to move across the globe is going to be in Africa's favor. Other societies are going to be aging, when Africa is going to be much younger and better educated. And that, I think, has many opportunities in there. And that expanding middle class. If you've traveled to Nairobi or Dar es Salaam or Kampala or Ghana, the supermarkets kind of like spraying out from every corner. And that is also changing how people get access to food and how we think about food procurement and the logistics around production of food. So that's really changing how things are working. So I think that in spite of all the clever thinking and innovation that happens in many places, especially in academia, urbanization is beginning to solve some of our critical problems. It's creating new opportunities. But it's also challenging academia to think differently about how problems might get solved. And I think it's also helping us to think differently about the moment and the place that Africa is in, and what new collaborations, such as the one that we have with the University of Fraser Valley, is helping to kind of excavate the edges of that and create new opportunities for re-understanding and reimagining where Africa might go. So I think that the urban moment is ready to launch a new age of opportunity for Africa to overcome some of the most binding challenges that we've had for many years. It's very rare that this kind of convergence happens. But think about a rapidly growing urban population that is younger, better educated, and more efficient. That is also better connected with rural spaces. That is also hungry. I think what it does is it presents many kind of multiple and enabling, also mutually reinforcing internalities. So you have all of these things that are basically internal conditions within that subsystem that you're looking at. It's a young population, it's rapidly urbanizing, it's better educated, it's better connected to rural areas. So you have all of these things that are happening at the same time. It's a very, very benign convergence that actually signals an important transformation in many ways that we would not have imagined. So these reinforcing internalities enable Africa to overcome these challenges, especially around markets, for instance. If you talk to anyone, I've worked with Jeff Sachs when we in the first kind of installment of development goals, which used to be called Millennium Development Goals, and we've now morphed into Sustainable Development Goals. And that time, it was really about 8 goals that were around solving hunger, education, maternal health, and all of these things. And in many cases, what Jeff Sachs used to say is that you've got to create these enabling conditions and think about it as a snooker ball, as a snooker game, and which is the ball that you have to hit that will hit the other balls that enables all of these benign convergences to happen. But now simultaneously, we have markets emerging through rapid urbanization. We have technology that is enabling better connection, whether it is through cell phone technology, movement of money, movement of technology. We talked about climate change. Can you imagine a farmer sitting somewhere? And one of my colleagues, Marcus Walsh, is working under a project funded by the Gates Foundation. And the whole idea is that we're digitizing all of Africa's soils and putting those on a map in an application. A farmer would be able to sit somewhere, just like they did in Bangladesh, to assess the risk of hitting arsenic when you're drilling wells. They'll sit in there and they can just query the database, and it will tell them what kind of soils they're sitting on. They'll be able to add a layer of weather information. It will tell them what the season is going to be, and therefore what kind of seed to plant. Now, this is really what technology is doing. And Gates is working on this with Columbia University and my colleagues in Africa to basically create this in the space of application of Google Earth. So you can actually find that information when a farmer goes in there, and they can get a lot of things. And right now, we even have technologies that enable farmers to speak directly with supermarkets to understand when they need to make supplies. Farmers are speaking amongst themselves in retail, in wholesale local markets to figure out what produce is needed. Capital moves much more easily through technology. Value addition is now much more robust and more accessible. Farmers know what the value chains look like, and they know what to produce and for when. And innovation now is rapidly riding the capital wave and riding the technology wave and creating new possibilities. Rural and urban spaces are better integrated. So I think that Africa's future is bright. And it's been made even brighter by the urban moment and the fact that we can now produce food for larger congregations of populations that have better access to income and therefore removes all of these, all the notions of agriculture being unprofitable. It's still difficult to farm in Africa with all of the things that we talked about, climate change, not so great soils, etc. But I think those things can be overcome with better innovation. So what I think is that the opportunity exists across these regions, and an urban moment is imminent, but there's still work to do. The urbanization phenomena is still very new. For instance, the city of Nairobi, in its 100 years of existence, has just recently passed a bill that promotes and regulates agriculture. So this is still very early days. We're just beginning to grapple with these things. And I think part of it is the colonial legacy that Africa also has to grapple with, that in many ways did not internally understand the circumstance of that colonial space and the opportunity. I think the logic of the colonial state was very different from what we're trying to achieve now. So the work that we've done with the University of Fraser Valley has really been tapping into this brand new opportunity, where you have a city that's been in existence for over 100 years, but has had very little attention paid to how cities might function and how agriculture plays a role as an integral land use option. Agriculture was relegated to rural areas, and basically that's the only place food could be grown. And I think that was a terrible mistake, and has created many kind of path-dependent problems just by that very nature. So that means that urban planning does not think about urban land use as a valid, does not think about agricultural land use as a valid land use. And we're now seeing some of the problems that have been critical in the West that you're now trying to overcome. I think this reckless suburbanization that has many problems. And when that happens and land is not protected for agricultural use, you have all kinds of terrible things that Mark talked about. You know, food miles are getting much wider, and we at the same time trying to green the planet. So those two things become conflicting, and I think that's what we're learning from the work that we've been doing. That food systems, even in these very early days, are very complex. We just don't understand enough about how food moves and who's playing in there. What happens is that we have self-interested, self-organizing entrepreneurs who are not regulated, who are basically just doing something to eke out a living. Now, how do you better understand that system so that you bring the right laws and regulation to support that? So that's the kind of work that we've been doing, which is pioneering. So this is the first time in the history of any urban environment in East Africa that there's been a concerted effort to understand urban food systems. And I think that a lot of the knowledge that is coming in here is now supporting the city authorities to better think about how to integrate food and food production in urban spaces. But I think one of the opportunities and one of the challenges that Africa is grappling with is unemployment, especially urban unemployment. You know, here it's not uncommon to to listen to anecdotes about how farming is being used to support people who've fallen off the truck, gone into drugs and alcohol and all of these things. In Africa, it's not going to be that. It's going to be giving people an opportunity and a chance to a dignified livelihood. And I think that moment is here, and the city authorities are recognizing that. Part of it is also to remove the constraints around agriculture, but also to leapfrog technology and provide sufficient capability in terms of food security that begins to drive down the prices of food, but also makes food safe, reduces the food miles, makes the food systems less fragile. And I think that's the moment that this study and this research that we've done is beginning to excavate and illuminate those pathways and provide the evidence base around which city authorities can better understand this urban moment and plan more strategically, taking advantage of a young population, better technology, better educated population. One of the other things that is obvious is that the legal and regulatory framework is very nascent and therefore is replete with all kinds of problems and calls for better innovation and better understanding of the opportunities. How do you regulate urban agriculture when a lot of the soils are not safe? So one of the studies that we're going to do in collaboration with the University of Basel is to map urban soils using spectroscopy and rapid technologies that can simultaneously give you an estimate, an assessment of multiple soil characteristics. We don't know how safe those soils are. Here in your country, you probably don't want to put anything in there. You want to bring soils in crates and grow the thing on the pavement, but not on city soils because of the risk of contamination. In Kenya, we don't know that. And therefore, we're going to start to do that and get the city authorities better prepared with the right legislation and regulation for urban food systems. Because again, the health risk is there. While the opportunity to grow food in places that are close to the consumers is there, the risk around the quality and the safety of the food is real. So a lot of research is needed to do that and to understand that. Again, the developments in peri-urban Nairobi are also completely disheartening. And this is the same story in Dar es Salaam and in Arusha and in Kampala, where developers will go up and put up a building whenever they want without any due consultation with the city authorities to basically understand how this fits in the larger urban conversation and urban strategic planning. So what I think is that while these opportunities exist, the legal and institutional frameworks are kind of being ramped up to respond to these challenges, I think academia is uniquely positioned to help support this new age of Africa's urbanism. And I think my colleague Shemdoe from other universities here, and I think part of what we're trying to achieve through this process is to build beyond this initial investment by the Aga Khan Foundation and Global Affairs Canada that provided us with the resources to do this work, to think about something more regional. Because I think there's a lot of lessons we've learned from this first project, but I think there's a lot that we can do collaboratively across East Africa, but also constantly bringing in our colleagues from the North to support that understanding, but also to create that unique opportunity for students to learn in international cross-cultural settings. So I think that if there's any doubt that academia is still relevant, I think those doubts must be dispelled today. Because I think in Africa, especially at this very unique moment, science and evidence and public engagement couldn't be more important in terms of helping societies navigate new challenges, but also respond to new opportunities much more robustly with evidence that is accessible, that is shared, that enables government to pull its weight, but enables communities and societies to thrive in a new age of commerce and opportunity. So thank you very much, and I look forward to an engaging conference. Thank you.